So I submitted a pretty diverse array of stories for the Victor Cohn Prize, ranging from the abstruse topic of gene drive, which is an even more abstruse sort of subset of genome editing, to a story about how a for-profit chain of cancer hospitals is cooking the books in terms of the success that they report. But in all the cases, I was looking for stories that were a little bit different from what readers might expect. You know, you always want to keep people reading, so if you can hook them at the beginning and tell them something that makes them think, huh, that's kind of not how I thought things worked, you know, you of course hope that they keep reading at least toward the end.
This story was twofold. The first part was looking at the research of two scientists in West Texas who had discovered that the DNA of antibiotic-resistant bacteria was blowing off of cattle feed yards on the wind. The second part of the story was basically looking at the industry response to that finding, which included meetings between representatives of the cattle industry and the scientists themselves, and meetings between these representatives and the higher-ups at the university where these researchers worked. And it became a story more generally about the politics that surround science and research coming out of public universities, the role that the media plays in this process, and what happens when a big and rather powerful industry like the cattle industry in Texas finds itself on the defensive and in the middle of an important question of public health.
I am a producer and a director. My program is called Approaching Science. This program is started to broadcasted from 1998. It has produced more than 4,500 science videos, and it has broadcasted for more than 2,000 hours. This program covered all aspects of the field of science.
The topic of my film tackles the mind-bending idea that there could be many versions of us out there somewhere in the cosmos. It essentially looks at how unique we are, and in the film I go on a hunt to try and find my cosmic twin to see if she's out there somewhere.
My book is The Dragon Behind the Glass, a true story of power, obsession, and the world's most coveted fish. It's about the Asian arowana, also known as the dragonfish. You can see it here. A primitive freshwater fish from Southeast Asia that's highly prized in the aquarium trade. So much so that collectors have supposedly spent more than $100,000 on a single specimen and even committed murder just to obtain one.
Well, I won the prize for 4 different stories that are on pretty different topics, ranging from taste loss after cancer treatment to collecting disease-transmitting bugs in cattle country in Texas. But one in particular that I really loved was about the folks who are convinced to have a psychological condition that means they're convinced they're being attacked by insects, and so they seek out the help of entomologists.
The story was about the mysteries of anesthesia, the fact that although it's something very common and usually safe, scientists don't know the mechanisms that occur during anesthesia in the brain yet, because they don't know exactly what consciousness is.
Well, the story really found me. I grew up in Hampton, Virginia. My dad is a NASA Langley research scientist, and I grew up in this community where a lot of people were scientists, engineers, and mathematicians. So I think in a lot of ways I was looking for my own origin story and for the origin story of the community that I grew up in, and also of a lot of parts of the American 20th century.
I think the moment of clarity came when we started to work with a scientist from Columbia University. I went to New York and sat down and talked to him and said, listen, we're really interested in finding drug interactions that can cause this sudden cardiac death. You know, maybe your model, all this cool work you're doing in big data, maybe your work can be applied to this. What do you think about that? And he said, yeah, that's a great idea, you know, let's do that.
I was curious about this story from the beginning when I first read the press release out of Texas Tech. I was working for the Texas Tribune at the time, and they sent me up to Lubbock to do a short and newsier piece about this. And I think I realized it was going to be an interesting story, or had the potential to be an interesting story, when I talked to a lot of different people, the researchers, doctors treating antibiotic resistance, a principal at a local school, and people in the cattle industry who all had different reactions to this news that antibiotic resistance could be moving in the air around them. So that tension was built in from the beginning, and journalists like tension. In addition to that, there was the science, which I didn't understand at all at that point. So it had the potential for being complex.
There is almost always this moment of a clicking in some sense, where I'm talking to someone and I just never want to stop talking to them because they are so fascinating, and I think that's the moment when I think, I need to write about this entomologist, or this citizen scientist, or this cancer patient, or whoever it is.
As my mother was dying, I was there for the last few days with her constantly, and I was writing down a lot of what was happening, I think just as a way of processing it. And then I just put the notes away and never really wrote anything about it. And it took me several years before I started processing it and wanting to write it into a story. So although I was writing about it at the time it happened, it took me about 5 years to be able to write this essay.
By accident, I saw a talk by Thomas Hales here in New York, and there he talked about how he came up with the proof and how he had trouble publishing it because people couldn't understand the proof because it was so complicated. And so not only did it take him decades to come up with the proof, then it took him even almost as long to convince people that his proof is correct. And in that talk, he talked very emotionally about it and how exhausting it was for him, what a struggle it was for him. And that was really something different. That was, I think I haven't seen scientists talking about their work like that before, and that captivated me, and that made me want to tell the story on the radio.
I've always been fascinated by this amphibian. Their presence remind me of the pre-Hispanic past of my city and my own culture, and the fact that it is about to disappear from its natural environment led me to report the situation in the hope of being able to promote those efforts and raise awareness among the people.
The moment that we realized we had to write this story, first we started digging into the topic of stillbirth and into what happened to our own son. But after a while, we jumped onto things that weren't okay. So we thought, this is not just about our own son, this is not just our story. We have to write a whole story about this.
I realized I wanted to pursue this story when I was driving through River Rouge, Detroit, and got out of my car, and the air immediately smells like rotten eggs and burnt plastic, and that's just completely normal there. You inhale and it's like a spray of gravel in your throat. You can really feel it. And while I was in River Rouge, I met Elizabeth Milton. She's an asthma educator, and she goes door to door trying to teach kids and adults how not to die from their chronic and extreme asthma. And when she told me that no matter what she does, their conditions don't improve because she can't keep them from being exposed to the air, that was just a really heartbreaking moment, and so I continue to work with her.
Our producer, Ivan Bronstad, got a tip that 4 doctors at the Karolinska had made a report, a very solid one, about shortcomings in Paolo Macchiarini's articles. And they've been working with the patients and searching for a solution to their very bad condition. So they were looking into his articles to see, is there a solution to these patients' condition? But what they saw in the articles was a picture that didn't at all reflect reality. The allegations in this report were very, very serious, and for us it was interesting immediately, because if this was true, how could it have happened at the Karolinska Institute and hospital, where which is home for the Nobel Prize.
The response to the book has been really gratifying, in part because the aquarium hobby is actually a holdover from the 19th century when amateur naturalists basically invented modern biology. And I'm always impressed by how much serious aquarists know about fish and about the natural world, so it really means a lot to hear from them. At the same time, I'm probably most touched when people who wouldn't expect to have any interest in fish or ichthyology find themselves falling under the spell of this world, because that's what happened to me.
So a few months after the story published, two of the main polluters in the story, both DTE Energy coal plants, actually announced they were shutting down.
Well, the response was really nice. It was published in Agencia Sync, whose articles are published under a Creative Commons license. This is that everybody who likes them can republish them, provided that the name of the author and Agencia Sync are indicated. So it was republished in some of the Spanish national newspapers, some of the most read scientific web pages here in Spain, and the response was nice because people didn't get alarmed. They didn't start to think that anesthesia was something dangerous, even we don't know the precise mechanisms. It was a matter of curiosity. People get strange about it, but I think they understood that we don't know the precise mechanisms about anesthesia because we don't know the precise mechanisms about consciousness yet.
In the publishing community, the academic publishing community, people were very happy with the story. I think it was shared on several blogs and other fora for academic publishing like PubPeer and Retraction Watch. Even the peer review service of the AAAS mentioned it on Twitter, and they said it's a must-read for every journal editor. So yeah, I was really happy how this was received, yeah.
I've had a really positive response to the story from people messaging me saying they really like the topic even though they didn't quite understand it. People finally understanding more about this unique concept of parallel universes which you see in so many popular books and movies.
I was really scared putting the essay up because it was a very personal topic, but it got a huge, very positive response. It got, I believe, over 100,000 hits in the first several days. It's gotten over 600 comments online, and I got about 100 plus emails, personal emails from people. Most of the emails I got were from people who had similar experiences with dying parents. But I did get a few very touching responses from physicians. The best one was from a physician who was an intensive care doctor who said that she had been concerned about the way people died in the ICU and had been considering going back for a fellowship in palliative care, and that my article had persuaded her to do that. So that meant a lot to me.
The story on delusional parasitosis got a pretty interesting response, especially from folks who I suspect may themselves suffer from delusional parasitosis, which I should have expected. But it also got a great response from a lot of entomologists who told me they've dealt with these kinds of patients and learned a lot from the entomologist I was profiling about how they could be better at helping those patients through these issues.
People were telling us afterwards that they really discussed what they had to do with our story because they heard about the things that went wrong and how the system of the Dutch birth care makes these things go wrong. And we also received a lot of responses from other parents that lost their own child from a comparable reason.
And there's been a lot of reforms on this story. The major pharmacy chains are making significant changes, and we're following that. There's been changes in law, changes in policy, and we're following that. That work will continue sometimes for years.
One of the advice I give to the new science journalists is to fight the dominant stereotype of the scientist. There are many women scientists, there are many LGBT scientists. and they should be represented in the science stories.
I think that the work that you mostly have to do as a young science writer is, of course, you write these news articles about the publications at top journals, but I think my advice would be to not only focus on that work and to always have some space for yourself to pursue the stories that you think are important. It could be stories that are just that you find by just asking yourself, looking around and asking yourself, well, what's important to me? How does this work? Why is this like it is? And you can just start with something that looks small and well, could end up as a big story in the end.
Well, I think it's a bit difficult to give any advice. Probably the best one is just to practice themselves, to enjoy themselves, to get better while practicing. And once they know they like it, they want to dedicate to this, and they are minimally proud of what they are doing, and then just start sharing their content.
Don't be afraid to admit what you don't know. We work with scientists, and sometimes scientists can be intimidating in their amount of knowledge, but it's your job to keep asking those questions, and you won't look silly for not knowing. I would also say get on the ground. Scientists can be some of the most fascinating, dynamic people. They love what they do, and you get twice the story if you actually meet them face to face.
Since I graduated from the university, I entered this program and began to produce science videos for 19 years. I was at the same time as every young man who entered the field of scientific reporting, and would feel that the scientific coverage was too complicated and too far from our life. But as long as you do some depth exploration, you will find that the scientific reporting is a very exciting job.
Je peux leur conseiller de travailler et de travailler, de vérifier leurs informations et d'être très rigoureux, parce que trop souvent la science est utilisée comme une espèce de journalisme de bonnes nouvelles dans les médias, et je pense que notre rôle va au-delà de ça.
Biggest obstacle to doing good science journalism in this country is the lack of outlets. I feel like we need a lot more local newspapers to bring back their science writers and their science pages and their science sections and their science editors, and have more local science coverage.
We don't have a lot of opportunities in science journalism in Latin America.
Funding. I've seen a couple of science journalism startups in Germany failing recently, and that's a shame. I think we have to find a way to make clear that science journalism has a value and a cost, and yeah, I would like to see more funding. And another obstacle is that it's becoming harder for us to make clear what science journalism is, as opposed to science PR or propaganda or even misinformation. I think it's pretty important for us to make clear what we are doing and how and why we are doing it. Yeah, because the lines get blurred there.
One of the biggest obstacles I think there is in Argentina is the lack of job opportunities. There are not many places, there are not many magazines, newspapers and TV shows where you can tell stories about science.
So in the United States, because there is this very well-developed spin machine, one of the biggest obstacles is just understanding that what you see reported, not only in press releases, but even in published papers, might not be exactly as it's portrayed. You just can't take anything for granted. You have to be suspicious, or at least skeptical, and that is something that I think we all have to learn how to do.
This is 2017, and we did this project in 2016. Journalism's dying. It's, being crippled by the industry, and here we did something that basically was as ambitious as anything I've done. with all the different institutions, the NewsHour and Science and Pulitzer Center, everyone's supporting it. But you can still do this kind of journalism, and that's one of the most heartening things to me about it.
This is a particularly pertinent question for me because ichthyology, the subject of my book, is not exactly the hottest field in science today. I had one ichthyologist tell me that it's considered a bit passé. When the current generation dies, no experts will remain for many groups of fish, some of them quite large. At the same time, as we all know, the Earth is hemorrhaging life, and our freshwaters are especially hard hit. Currently, more than a third of North America's fishes are at risk, about 40% of Europe's. According to the United Nations, 80% of the major rivers in China are now too polluted to support fish at all. In the tropics, forget about it. We don't even know what's there, much less what we're losing. So it's vital that we pay attention now, that we try to make sense of our relationship with nature, our desire to hold on to wild things, to possess them, to alter them, to preserve them, because we'll never have another chance.
I think it's important for a number of reasons. Partially, it's a way of being skeptical about the world, but it's also a way of sort of creating wonder about the world, and it's a really cool method to really understand what's going on behind all these mysterious phenomena.
The heart of this are people, and that is the most important thing that you can't lose track of. And so we were lucky that we were able to all spend some time and try and talk to enough people and meet people who were willing to share their stories with us and kind of walk through what this data really looks like for families and communities.
If you're just talking about rhetoric and you lose track of the data, I think you can end up not coming to useful conclusions. And if you are just paying attention to data, but you lose track of the people behind that, you also don't necessarily get to the right conclusions or to useful conclusions. And we wanted to sort of bring those things together, the data and the people, to really try to tell a story about gun violence in America that was a little different from how it was getting told everywhere else.
My audience is the world, and the world needs to know about science because everything that happens to us is related to science. These hurricanes that are hitting the United States right now, stem cell research, technology, everything is science related, and people need to be able to make informed decisions about their health and the climate and politics and the future of the world.
Science is really important for the 21st century. Citizens should know more about science to live in the 21st century where everything is touched by science, and science is everywhere. And we also have to remember that science doesn't belong to scientists. Science is part of our culture. Science is part of society.
People are more and more in a position where they are making their own judgments, and they become more self-conscious about what's going on in the world. And I think that's why they need science, and they need good science journalism and science communication to understand what's going on in the world. And as the world is getting more complicated, science is one way to find answers.